What's going on, guys? It's Hi with the Upper Left USA, and over the last few months I've essentially sold off all of my digital camera gear. The only thing that I've kept around is my Sony 24-70 f2.8 G Master because that's my favorite lens, focal length, and aperture combo. Every time that I've had to shoot digital photos or one of these videos, I've had to go out and borrow a Sony a7R II like I am doing right now. I've done this spring cleaning largely for two reasons. First is because I had a bunch of camera gear that I just wasn't using. I still had around some Nikon gear from my DSLR days. I believe for Nikon I sold a 24-70 f2.8, 7200 f2.8, and a 35mm f1.4. I even sold off a bunch of Sony gear including the a7R II, the a7S II, the 16-35mm f4, the 55-1.8, and the 28 f2. And like I said, the only lens that I kept around was my 24-70 f2.8 G Master for Sony E-mount, and that's the lens that I use whenever I borrow this Sony a7R II. The second reason for selling my gear off is because I am preparing. I am preparing for all of the gear that's coming out in 2018 and the years to come. 2018 is really turning out to be a pivotal point in the camera industry. Canon and Nikon have officially announced their serious mirrorless cameras, joining Sony, Fuji, Panasonic, and a few other companies. This year really seems to be an indicator for what's to come in the future, and that's mirrorless. So I sold off as much camera gear as I can to prepare myself for a possible brand and camera company switch if need be. I personally have no affiliation with any camera companies. Nobody writes any checks to me, so I look out for myself and my money. I've been with Sony for a few years now, and overall I would say that I'm happy with what I have, but I do have some complaints about the products that they produce, and if another company were to come out with something better that works better for me, I'd be happy to jump ship at any time. So by now there are plenty of other channels out there making very detailed videos breaking down every spec of these new cameras that have already been released and rumored cameras. So if that's something that you are looking for, please look it up for yourself. That's not what this video is going to be about. I don't want to keep repeating the spec sheets, so I'm just going to give you some of my opinions on the cameras that have already been released and the cameras that may or may not be coming out in the future, and why or why not I may be buying them. First came the Nikon Z6 and Z7. If these cameras had direct competition, it would be the Nikon Z6 with the Sony a7 III and the Nikon Z7 with the Sony a7R III. I would have to say that among all of the camera manufacturers, I had the most hopes for Nikon because I have a sentimental connection with the company. My first digital camera was the Nikon D5300, and my first film camera was the Nikon F3. I shot with Nikon a lot in the past and told myself that I would definitely keep them in mind if they came out with a good enough mirrorless system. But right off the bat, I cannot switch to the new Nikon mirrorless system because their lens lineup at launch just doesn't sync up with my personal workflow. For my personal work, I would really like to have a 24-70 f2.8 or something really close to it. The Nikon Z system launched with a 24-70 f4, which is nice, but for my personal work, I would really rather have an f2.8 or brighter because I do a lot of work in dimly lit situations. But according to the Nikon lens roadmap, a 24-70 f2.8 is coming out in 2019, so I'll just have to keep an eye out and see how the camera system is progressing when that happens. But if you're interested in the Nikon Z6 or Z7 and don't want to adapt lenses, I would highly recommend checking out the Sony a7 III and a7R III. I personally believe that they provide a better package than their Nikon equivalents. Do your own research and make a thorough and thoughtful comparison before you spend any money. The second camera that was recently announced was the Canon EOS R. I have to be honest, it's not the camera itself that impresses me, but the lenses available at launch, especially the 28-70 f2. Like I said, the 24-70 f2.8 is my favorite focal length aperture combo, but I do have my complaints. F2.8 is just not fast enough at times, and that means that I'm just going to have to mess with the exposure triangle, whether it be shutter speed or ISO, and I don't always want to do that. I've been dreaming of a 24-70 f2 or faster for the longest time, but I know that realistically that would probably never happen. Can it be made? Sure, but it's not the most practical thing, and I think the Canon 28-70 f2 really shows that. From the size comparisons that I've seen, the 28-70 f2 is absolutely massive. It makes the Sony 24-70 f2.8 G Master look small, and that was a lens that people were complaining about how large it was when it initially launched. Even though it's something that I've been lusting over for a while now, at the end of the day, the Canon 28-70 f2 is just not going to make me switch over to Canon. The EOS R body itself also didn't help. The two most notable things for me was the lack of in-body image stabilization and of course the 4K crop. IBIS is something that I really like to have in my camera bodies now, almost to the point where it's absolutely a requirement. IBIS just makes getting handheld shots in photos and videos so much easier, and I'm able to get much sharper results at slower shutter speeds. The 4K image crop is also a huge problem for me. The widest native lens at launch for the EOS R is the 24-105 f4. That 1.7 times crop would mean that you have an effective 35mm equivalent of 41-179mm. This is great on the long end, on the 179mm, but terrible if you're trying to get any wide shots. This just means that if I want a wide shot, I'm going to have to adapt lenses, and that means I'm going to have to buy those lenses initially until a proper native lens comes out, and of course that means I'm going to have to buy that and lose more money. The most practical use of the EOS R for me would have been in a vlogging scenario because it has a fully articulating flip-out screen, but that 4K crop just really missed the mark. But if you don't need to shoot in 4K or aren't worried about getting wide shots, then I think the EOS R is an interesting option. The third and most recent release is the Fujifilm X-T3. I personally have a lot of interest in this camera and am really considering picking one up. I actually owned the Fujifilm X-T1 and a bunch of the prime lenses for a period of time, and still to this day, I think that some of the sharpest and highest quality images that I've ever taken was taken on the Fujifilm X-T1 using those Fujinon prime lenses. This is in consideration to the fact that the Fujifilm X-T1 only had a 16 megapixel sensor. The Fujifilm X-T1 just gave me something that really no other camera has been able to do, and I attribute that to the lens lineup. Fuji lenses are just among the best of the best in my opinion, and now that the X-T3 has 26 megapixels, I have no doubts that the image quality will get even better. This, along with the ability to shoot in 4K 60p, something that really no other manufacturer besides Panasonic is giving to consumers in the mirrorless market, really appeals to me. I've been waiting for a larger sensor camera to offer 4K 60p for the longest time, and I'm so disappointed that no current Sony, Canon, or Nikon mirrorless cameras currently offer this. I personally think that what Fujifilm is doing with the X-T3 comes in such a complete package that it is very hard to really compete with. Upon initial impressions from the internet, it seems like the only fault that people are really finding with the X-T3 is that it has a smaller APS-C sensor. I personally don't really care about sensor size. I realize at times there are situations where a larger sensor would be better, but I know that I personally am able to create content with really whatever camera I have. Just give me the right lens and I'll be able to make that camera body work. And I think that Fujifilm has enough lenses and a wide enough variety of lenses to be able to get any work done. And those are the most recent camera releases, but there are a few more rumored to come out very soon. Rumor has it that Panasonic will also be entering the full-frame mirrorless scene pretty soon, and if they are able to produce quality products like they do on the Micro Four Thirds system, I think that Panasonic will be a major contender. Zeiss is also entering the full-frame mirrorless scene, but that camera is rumored to feature a fixed 35mm f2 lens. If this appeals to you, then you should definitely keep an eye out for that. I think the most anticipated launch for me is the Sony a7S III and a new Sony APS-C camera body. The a7S III is rumored to feature 4K 60p and a fully articulating screen. To me, this would make it the perfect vlogging camera, and is really the only reason holding me back from picking up a Fuji X-T3. There hasn't been much leaked about the new Sony APS-C camera body, so we'll just have to wait and see about that. So after talking about all those newly released cameras, rumored cameras, and how I'm preparing myself for a possible camera brand switch, I have decided and bought a new camera. And that new camera is the Sony a7R III. If you've been with this channel, you know that I actually own the Sony a7R III and recently sold it off. And in its place, I bought the Sony a7 III, but shortly after doing so, I was given an offer I really couldn't refuse. When I made my video explaining why I sold the a7R III and bought the a7 III, it largely came down to price. Although I like the a7R III better, it just didn't offer enough for me to be able to justify the $1,200 price difference. At the end of that video, I did mention how the price of the a7R III was steadily decreasing, and if it went under $2,500, I would consider picking another one up. Well, I was able to buy my new Sony a7R III for $2,200 brand new. That is $200 more than a retail Sony a7 III, and this was a no-brainer for me. I just had to pick it up. In this particular situation, the Sony a7R III just provides the best bang for the buck and just blows all the new cameras out of the water in terms of value. Also, considering that I still own the 24-70 f2.8G Master, I'm pretty much good to go. If I were to go with any other manufacturers, I would have to buy the body and at least one lens to even get started. At the end of the day, buying the Sony a7R III again just made sense financially, and it doesn't hurt that it's one of the best cameras on the market. If you're in the market for a new camera or are interested in switching to a new camera system, now is a really interesting time to do it. New cameras are coming out left and right, and there are so many options now. But if I were to give you one piece of advice, I would say to definitely take a look at the cameras that are already on the market. Cameras like the Sony a7R III and the a7 III are still very relevant, even in consideration with the newly released cameras. And if you don't need the latest and greatest, the previous generation mirrorless cameras are still very capable. All I'm saying is that before you make a huge financial investment, definitely scope out the camera market and see what's really out there. Just because you're seeing a lot of advertisement promoting all these new cameras right now doesn't mean that it will be the best options for you. Be honest with yourself and consider what you need to get the job done. Don't buy something just because it's brand new, and to be honest with you, a lot of these new cameras are using old technology, so there are definitely cheaper options out there. At the end of the day, these brands are likely not handing over checks to normal people like you or I, so there's no point being a fanboy when you're not getting anything out of it. Help you and your wallet out and do your own research to make sure that you're buying the right camera. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a thumbs up, share it around, comment down below with any thoughts or questions that you may have. Thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.